Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Illustration Department podcast. My name is Giuseppe Castellano. In this podcast, I talk to folks in illustration, graphic design, publishing, animation, and other creative fields about their work, the lessons they've learned, and the bumps and bruises they've experienced along the way. In this episode, my guests are Michelle Komie, publisher for art and architecture at Princeton University Press, and DB Dowd, author and professor of design in the Sam Fox School at Washington University, where he teaches in the MFA in Illustration and Visual Culture program. Among other topics, we talk about illustration's history, or rather, its past. DB explains what reading has to do with illustration. And Michelle and DB share how they, the publisher and the writer, approached the making of DB's book, Reading Pictures. I hope you enjoy our conversation. Michelle, I first reached out to you in 2022. In our correspondence, you mentioned that you were going to publish a book by DB on the history of illustration. And the initial publication date, I don't know if you remember, you probably do, was fall of 2024.
I do remember, and that was a date that had already been delayed a few times because this book has had a long life.
Okay, we're going to get to the life of it in a minute. So I have two questions. First, DB, we're recording this in 2026. I didn't go to Princeton or the Washington University of St. Louis, but I'm pretty sure my math is right. That's been 4 years. It's just a 350-odd page book on a hard-to-pin-down subject with 400 or so images. So what took you so long?
Well, there's a good question.
Thank you. That's the only one for the day.
Okay. If you had told me that it would take me 4 years to do this, I think I might have said, gosh, possibly not. But I am so happy that I did. Because as it turns out, it really did take that long. And I'm very pleased to have been able to work with Michelle on the project. And I'm most grateful for her patience, which was substantial. And I'm actually super happy with the book.
Yeah, you should. I'm a little angry with you because the book design is beautiful. The cover is outstanding. The title is great. And I'm just sort of like, damn it. If I wrote a book about illustration, that's how I want it to look, and you already took it. So
that is the highest possible compliment. Thank you for saying that. That's fantastic to hear. Wonderful.
Yeah. So Michelle, what led you to acquiring Reading Pictures?
This wasn't so much an acquisition as a search over many years. And so I published very widely in art history, visual culture, architectural history, some urban history, very historical books in a lot of cases, some for specialized audiences, some for non-specialized audiences, all different levels of readers and expertise. I previously worked for a different publisher and in 2014 published a book by Michael Lobel called John Sloan, Drawing on Illustration. Acquisitions editors find their way to projects via many different avenues. We have networks, we have the interests of our publisher and the strengths of our publisher, and we have our own personal interests. And you can see threads of all of these things on the lists of individual editors. If I only publish things that I love, I would be a very unsuccessful editor.
Right.
I can't take that out. I can't extract that from my editorial eye. And I do love illustration. I've always loved illustration. And I studied illustration as an undergraduate student.
Ooh, where?
At Washington University in St. Louis.
I've heard of it.
Yes. And really felt for a long time as I moved through the seasons and the years of publishing that there was a real deficit, that somehow, though there were wonderful syntheses, like multiple different angles on graphic design and collage and digital design and architecture, and that illustration was just, and I have a wonderful project on cartooning in process, big synthetic history, that illustration was really just missing. And there were existing books on individual artists or styles or eras, and there is also a wonderful, huge anthology. But one of the things that we look for are the spaces between the books that exist, and whether that is in readership and audience and argument and methodology, sometimes in price point. If the major book in the field is $270, we can identify an opportunity to bring a new kind of project to a different reader. So for a long time, I had really been thinking about how to do a book like this. I'd been talking to a number of people, and I talked to Douglas early on and asked him for his thoughts on who might be able to do this. And he did not suggest himself at all. And I believe he said nobody can do this, that this is really the only kind of, only a large number of people, an editorial committee could really undertake a synthesis of this particular art form. It's so complicated. It's so hard to even bookend what it is not. Yep. And anyway, it was always in the back of my mind. And I think I had several conversations a year for many years that really led nowhere. And I then had a British publisher bring a project to me that was a shorter synthesis, history of illustration. They had an author on board, and they were looking for a worldwide publisher. And so I jumped at that. We weren't able to proceed with it for a couple of reasons. And we needed another author. I went back to Douglas, and years later, I think he and I had first talked about this in 2014, and now it was 2021, where I had a kind of half of a book or a book idea and a team on board that wanted to do this book, and no author, and a book that could really be reshaped, that needed to be reshaped and kind of rethought from scratch. Thankfully, he was interested. So that was amazing. Many years in between, and you'd have to kind of ask him what changed in his professional life that made him think this was something he can take on. I mean, I can say that there is you have to have a certain level of, it's very hard for a younger scholar to take on a book like this, no matter what the topic is, this kind of large, synthetic, bird's eye view of a discipline. That's a really big ask. So often it is senior scholars who are able to do this, are willing to do it, and have a new take on the topic that they feel that feels urgent to them. And I've seen this in a number of different spaces, and I'm very, very happy that everything aligned in this case.
Well, I don't have to ask him the question because I know exactly why he decided to say yes. Because the last time he and I chatted was in 2021. We mostly debated whether or not illustration was art. I said it is. He said it's its own thing. And I'll drop that link in the show notes for people who want to listen. I was right. He was wrong. So anyway, so other than that podcast chat, DB being the impetus for you deciding to write this book, I'm just kidding. What was the impetus for ultimately saying, you know what, I'll do it?
Great question.
2 for 2.
Well, first of all, let me go back to Michelle's narrative, which is accurate. What I remember saying, and what I said in a number of conversations during that decade, I think, is that I was not convinced that illustration had a history. It has a past, but it hadn't really risen to the level for me, certainly in 2014, I didn't feel it had sort of gotten to the level of having a fancy word, a historiography, like a theory of its own history. It was just like a sequence of people and technology and styles and associated, for lack of a better term, fandom. So it didn't really feel like a full-on subject. It felt like an enthusiasm. I just wasn't ready to deal with that. Now, what changed in the intervening years is that in 2019 at WashU, we launched a new graduate program, an MFA in illustration and visual culture, which was an attempt maybe to bring some kind of rigor or deeper exploration of what do we make of this stuff? It's everywhere.
Right.
People often love it, but it's been bedeviled by status anxiety and a desire to be something other than what it was, and it has been
what you and I discussed last time,
and it has been condemned for the very interesting thing that it is.
Right.
At any rate, we'd started this program, and I drew the straw of teaching history to these incoming students who come from really wide backgrounds, super interesting group. Some people will come from liberal arts colleges and they majored in French but they drew on the side, and other people got degrees in graphic design. Still others got BFAs in illustration, and also very different age ranges. So that group comes together and has to be acculturated into the history of this thing, which has lacked a history. So I'd been doing that for several years, and because there wasn't a text, there was a big anthology published in 2019 by Susan Doyle and Jaleen Grove and Whitney Sherman were the editors, and a very ambitious
2 out of 3
project.
podcast guests right there. Yeah.
And I even contributed to that, but I couldn't really teach a course from it. Like it's more like a reference work from my perspective,
right?
And a very valuable reference work, but I couldn't use it to help tell a story. So I'd gotten to the point where like I'm pouring all this work into generating my own materials anyway. So maybe this is the time to think about trying to wrap my arms around the subject in a more rigorous way. So that's what had changed.
Yeah.
I had a really immediate need that was costing me, time and labor. Maybe by taking on this project, I could subcontract some of that work to a book.
Right.
And to yourself.
To myself. Yes.
Yeah. And make it a required reading for every class here on out. Just kidding.
I have several authors with whom I've kind of worked. I've worked that same way, where I'll meet with someone and there isn't really a book conversation yet on the table, nothing specific, but someone will get very excited and want to talk to me at length about a syllabus for a new class they're teaching. Mm-hmm. The level of enthusiasm demands my attention, and particularly if it's in a new space. Mm-hmm. And I have had book projects come out. I think some of the most wonderful book projects come out of teaching, whether it's a way to refine your thinking about a topic or to think around something that is pretty new, because what questions come up. They're facing you every day. So that's interesting, Douglas. I didn't actually know that was part of the motivation.
You can add that to the marketing copy later.
Yeah, true. Yeah.
There are obviously plenty of, Susan Doyle, of course, and Jaleen and Whitney, if they're listening. Hi, guys. There are other books that have covered history of illustration and or graphic design. And there's the many books by Leonard Marcus, who was also on the podcast, and Stephen Heller, of course. I forgot the title of his book, but it was something like Illustration of Visual History or something like that. Mm. But this isn't necessarily a book solely about illustration history, right? You're covering more cultural history. You go back further and you're coming up to more recent times than a lot of those books. Those books are a bit more focused. So, beyond illustration history, what is it about?
Well, first of all, in the interim between, hey, would you be interested in working on this book project, and my saying, yes, I will do this, was a month, which I asked for to see if I could come up with a thesis for such a book. Because I did not want to write a story of style. I did not want to recapitulate histories that have already been written. So in order to do that, I had to wrap my head around this thing which has resisted definition. Ultimately, I concluded on the most core level that illustration is inextricably tied to the act of reading. If you're not reading, it's just art. So
wait, I'm sorry. What was it? It's just what?
If you're not reading,
illustration is just?
It's just art.
Art.
It's just
art.
like, look at the thing on the wall.
Oh my God. It took 5 years, but I won the debate. Nice. Sorry, DB, go ahead. Sorry. I'll be more serious moving forward.
There's lots of jousting possible. So ultimately, I mean, that the core issue of reading got refined.
Right.
The sentence in the text is illustrations are pictorial, symbolic, and decorative contributors to reading experiences published in vernacular languages. And there might be one more clause, but that's it. So it's connected to reading. It's connected to the history of literacy. It's connected to modernity through printing and publishing.
Not that you need me to agree with you, but I agree with that.
Oh, well, thank you.
Anytime.
I mean, it seems sort of commonsensical, but we'll see whether other people agree. But that enabled me to get underway.
Douglas, I have a question about that. So is that a thesis that you came up with over that month, or is that a thesis you had arrived at previously and then needed that month to kind of push at and test?
Neither. That thesis, what came out of the month was being able to say, oh, reading. That's good enough for me to start. The distillation which occurred over the next several years to reach that sentence, that was a hard-fought sentence. The research I ended up doing for the book informed that. So the gut instinct, I started with that and then refined it.
Michelle, turning over to the making of the book, how much of the acquisition process, not just for this book, but in general, from your perspective, hinges on comparative titles?
A good amount. There's a limited number of variables we have to work with when we're trying to determine the extent to which a book project is viable. And one of them is the number of projected readers we think we will find and reach, and how many people are we going to be able to convince to purchase this beautiful object that we've just manufactured? Spent years and years and years, sometimes in vast years, sometimes a shorter amount of time, kind of trying to perfect. So publishing is an art, not a science. There's a lot of risk involved. There's a lot of educated guesswork. There are a lot of instincts. There are a lot of people feeling a certain way on a certain day and kind of seeing how long you can sustain that feeling. But this was something I really believed in. And sometimes I want to publish books that I want to read. I'm not the reader for every single book that I publish. I'm not the ideal reader, but that's okay. I don't have to be. For this book, I am the ideal reader, and I am an ideal reader. And this is a book that I very much wanted to see in the world. This kind of big synthesis. It's a history. It's also a theory. We left that out of the subtitle, but there is a new theory here. There's an entirely new positioning of this genre. So I could visualize this book when we first started talking about it, which is another important thing for me as an acquiring editor. I have to be able to see it in my head. And I am familiar also with Douglas's voice as a practitioner, as a scholar, as a speaker and a thinker. And I just felt this was the right match of author and subject.
When it comes to crunching profit and loss margin numbers, no collaboration with DB is ever a loss. It's always a win. But what weight does the market, like what percentage, how am I asking this question? What percentage does the market take up when it comes to informed guesses and hunches and number crunching?
Yeah. I mean, we have certain information it's funny. the amount of time I've spent kind of, I don't think my publishing is explicit, very, very numbers based in particular. I work on these expensive books. There are a lot of costs in these books. They have a lot of paper. They're printing them overseas or for color. Almost every book that I do kind of falls into those categories. So we do have certain kinds of information that is available to publishers, proprietary information about how books have sold, how other books have sold. And you can also, you try to identify things that are similar, but it's not going to be exactly similar or the book that you're about to take on probably wouldn't need to exist. So it's tough. But looking, I certainly looked at, and there aren't a lot of books in this space. There's no book that's doing this. So I looked at a lot of different graphic design histories. It's an industry of wonderful books on design and design history and designers. I looked at books about...
Like Louise Feely has a few.
Yeah. I looked at books about specific illustrators that had done well and received a lot of attention. And in the end, we make our best guess. That's how it works.
How do you balance confidence that it will sell whatever number of copies you have for the first print run against hope that it will sell?
Wow. I think publishing is pretty much equal parts confidence, expertise, experience, and hope. It is all of those things. And terror. Yeah. And risk. We are in the business of risk management, I think. That kind of, sounds actuarial or insurance related, but I'm responsible for the full list of titles that I oversee. And I also have the benefit of working for a nonprofit publisher, a university press. As long as my total list is breaking even and marginally profitable, I have been doing my job. So it's true. It's true. But for art book publishing, the risks and the costs are higher. The risks are higher. And we have to be really selective for that reason.
The reason I ask that is because I work with illustrators day in and day out. And one frustration that comes up a lot, especially when they're submitting something written to an editor and then get rejected, it's like you can't get too close to other books in the market because then the editor will say, this book already exists.
Yeah.
But you, in your comparison titles, have to include books that are like your book.
Right. And only in the past 2 to 3 years. I understand it's impossible.
So it's like, wait, what? I can't be too on the nose, or I'm just literally handing the editor a reason to reject my book.
Yeah.
And in addition to that, different publishers operate differently. You just said you're a nonprofit. You have there's a certain profit margin that you need to hit. And different publishers, like how can you compare, let's say, a book of this that focuses on the similar subject matter published by Penguin or someone larger who have more infrastructure?
Yeah.
But that book was published in 2020 during COVID. So how do you factor in those numbers when you're making the comparisons? You know what I mean? To me, it doesn't make much sense to compare one book to the other, especially when it's a different publisher. This often comes up with illustrators who are worried that maybe their first or second or third published books didn't do so well. So they worry that it'll affect their career because an editor will look back on the sales numbers of those books and go, gosh, they didn't sell too well. But how can you compare when they were published in different years, different publishers, different markets? So this comes up a lot.
It does come up a lot. And these are very real and fair and reasonable questions to ask in a competitive market in which we are constantly trying to make the case for books and printed material over and over and over. I want people to feel like they have to own this information and they have to own it in this format. I want them to buy the book. I mean, it's fine. It's the same revenue, but it's really tough. And when I'm presenting books to my sales team, the kinds of information they want, I have to do the exact same thing that my authors do. I have to provide relevant, comparable titles published within the past 2 to 3 years for which we have real data. But I am very sympathetic. And I certainly also have friends who are authors and friends who are artists. And first-time authors don't have a sales track record, which can be both a challenge
Right.
and also a wonderful blessing because someone who's feeling very optimistic can just take a flyer.
Right.
I think it is tricky, and I don't have a magical I don't have an answer really to that other than just to be sympathetic and say, yes, we are all facing those same challenges, editors and authors alike.
DB, back over to you. Who is the target audience, speaking of markets and channels, for this book? When did that enter the chat, as it were? In the very beginning, or was that later on, like where you focused more on the subject matter and less on who was going to end up reading it?
I would say that I always write for an interested, engaged reader who's interested in culture.
Okay.
So I did not want to write a book that felt academic in the possibly unfairly pejorative sense of that term. I wanted it to feel accessible and appealing. I mean, it's dense. It covers a lot of material, and it draws on current scholarship, and it, floats a few new ideas. But I mean, the word hegemon doesn't appear in the book. There are certain vocabulary terms and a kind of voice that signals a scholarly audience.
Okay.
I did not choose to write that way. I chose to write for somebody. I'm trying to tell a story. I mean, the way the book is organized, the chapters are thematic. Each chapter sets out to tell a story about how illustration, as part of a larger writing, publishing, distributive enterprise, shaped modern life. That takes it in a certain direction and makes it much less, canonical.
Right.
There are lots of people who you would expect to see in an illustration history who are missing in this book. Lots of people whose work I admire very greatly. There are more graphic designers in this book and more emphasis on the visualization of language than is typically true in an illustration text.
Right. This isn't like The Illustrator in America. I think that's the title. Walt Reed's book.
Right.
Which is a great book, but man, that sucker is heavy and expensive, but comprehensive. And I think it takes us to maybe 2000. So it's missing the last 26 years.
And also it consists of condensed biographies,
right,
of many illustrators. So to the extent it tells a story, it's telling a story about individual lives and careers.
Right. Covering this much history must have required a great deal of research. Newsflash, everybody. That's called Castellano Analytics right there. Castellytics, if you will. Were there gaps in the timeline that were harder to fill than others?
Michelle will confirm energetically that the amount of history and, historical writing about a given time period and how much of that made it into the book, much more was written than survived. I think it was very deftly edited. If you say to somebody, you make a reference to World War I, my working assumption is that very, very many people are not really going to know much or anything about World War I. So you have to tell them something. And because World War I is kind of is like the gateway to Dada. It's like it's a big deal on many different levels, culturally and historically.
That's how I'm going to say it from that one. Every time I talk about World War I, I'm just going to say World War I, and then say it's the gateway to Dada.
There's a Hannah Arendt quote, which I'm not going to remember precisely, but just the spectacular violence and senselessness of World War I is epical. At any rate, back to your question. So here we are talking about World War I. Well, that enables us to look at posters and enables us to think about the subject of visual rhetoric. So, there's a chapter about propaganda and persuasion. Mm-hmm. It actually begins with the collaboration between Martin Luther and Lucas Cranach in early Reformation propaganda, which was wickedly effective. That's a case, for example, where there was a conversation about, wait a minute, we're looking at World War I posters. Why are we talking about the 1520s? And so I had to shape that in such a way that it made sense to enter the subject of modern visual rhetoric through the Reformation and then move on to mass printing and publishing, which is, starts in the late 19th century. So that's about trying to tell a story about a subject that isn't about the date range. And the chapters did have date ranges for a while, and we ultimately discarded them because they ultimately were confusing.
That couldn't have been easy self-editing. You could have a 350-page book on just propaganda during World War I. So did you find that to be a challenge? Once you start going down rabbit holes, I know I do, once I start going down rabbit holes on Illustrator biographies, it opens up a whole channel of text that I could potentially write or at the very least think about. So was the self-editing process not, like you said, more was written than we could see in the book, but I'm sure a lot of that was Michelle. But was it easy to self-edit? Was it easy to say, you know what, I need to stop here. I think I've covered this enough. I need to move on to the next thing.
No, I would not say it was easy. But what I would say, the way this project came to me was a huge gift in the sense that, as Michelle has described, there was already a book project before I entered the conversation. And yes, we looked at what had been done so far, and my reaction was, let's start over. But there were parameters. The parameters were, this is a 400-page book. Mm-hmm. It has to come in at 400 pages. It should have 12 chapters. In the original specs, I think the conversation around the word count for chapters was like 3,000 words.
Yeah.
Which I did not.
No. Yeah. Which you did not know, and maybe.
Well, no, I did know. I heard that, and I just thought, well, that's ridiculous.
Yeah, it was. It was a completely different book project. It was completely different.
That's too few, right?
Yes, too few.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. I was going to say, I was like, wait, okay.
But and there were versions of some chapters that were 9,000 words long. Mm-hmm. I actually don't know where they came in, but I would guess they're 5,000. I don't know.
In the current book? In the final manuscript. Okay. Yeah.
At any rate, that gives you some, let's just say for the purposes of discussion, the target was 3,000. I came in at 9. It ends up at 6. Mm-hmm. One of the things I did to keep myself from just being completely overwhelmed.
That's what I'm trying to get at.
Well, when I took on, when I started a given chapter, I did not look up a gazillion journal articles. I would choose 3 or 4 or 5 books that were really compelling books written by people with a strong point of view on a subject, which generally often wasn't illustration, but was the evolution of gender or another big subject.
Right.
I got really interested in the occupation of Japan after World War II. I read widely, but not really informationally, but rather for perspectives. So I'm reading stuff like that, but I'm sort of moving like an army ranging across territory, eating whatever it can find. So it had this weird combination of kind of curious reading and reflectivity, while also like, okay, I need to start writing this.
This podcast is produced by the Illustration Department, a global leader in online education for illustrators. Visit illustrationdept.com for offerings like mentorships and portfolio reviews, testimonials, our alumni showcase, our best-selling Substack, and more. That's illustrationdept.com. And now, back to our conversation. When I write illustration history posts on Substack, I often become aware of my own biases. Often I'll cover American illustrators. Often it's about children's books, certain tastes and interests of my own that kind of make their way into what it is that I'm writing or focusing on. And I'm aware of it. And I'm trying to break out of it and trying to expand my own understanding of illustration history and who was doing it and where else could I look. You mentioned backgrounds earlier when you're talking to students and trying to figure out like how to teach like a group of students or how to talk about a certain subject to a group of students who come from so many different backgrounds. How did you keep your own biases, assuming you have any, from influencing the historical markers that you chose to cover?
Well, first of all, I don't really think that's possible, but
one can try.
Well, yeah, you can be more or less alert, but I don't think you can eliminate such things. Again, the nature of the project came to the rescue here because I've mentioned page count and number of chapters and estimated length. I haven't mentioned the fact that the specified coverage of the book was North America, Europe, and East Asia. Mm-hmm. There's a chapter in this book about the history of the idea of race. There's a chapter about cultural memory. So I'm a white guy. So I'm writing about the perspectives of different groups of people and trying to keep that very much in mind, thinking about communities of production, communities of reception, like who are these things being made for? The children's chapter, I think it's safe to say, is unlike most chapters in books on the illustration of children's literature, because one of the basic questions I asked at the beginning of the chapter was, whose children are we talking about? And what do we want them to learn? So there's for example, one of these books that I read, which was enlarged my perspective, was a book by Robin Bernstein. I'm blanking on the title. Childhood, Racial Innocence, Childhood in America, something, that spends a lot of time examining Uncle Tom's Cabin and the material, the visual and material culture of Uncle Tom's Cabin, its relationship to the Wizard of Oz. There are just stupefying things that one learns digging a little deeper.
Right.
It was sort of driven by curiosity. So I would try to ask a question. And so that the question in that particular case, whose children, was a way to start.
Yeah. By the way, I looked up that title. It's you got it right, pretty much. Racial Innocence, Performing American Childhood from Slavery to Civil Rights.
A great book. A great book.
And available, so people can buy it if they want to. Speaking of books, in Kirkus's starred review, which is no small feat, as you both know, they write, although Dowd demurs in calling his project encyclopedic, it is impressively capacious. I like impressively capacious. It rolls off the tongue better than extraordinarily extensive. Amazingly ample. I'm going with amazingly ample. I digress. So, and then Publishers Weekly calls it lively and authoritative, which is how I coincidentally describe my dentist. Michelle, do starred or strong reviews move the needle in any real way when it comes to sales?
Oh my gosh. We are grateful for every single bit of attention that we can get for our books. The extent to which it moves a needle is impossible to actually confirm or deny. But, for places like for Kirkus and Publishers Review or Publishers Weekly, I often have to, we get a great starred review and I send it to an author. These are industry publications. They have no idea. They've never heard of Kirkus. They've never, what's Publishers Weekly.
Exactly.
So you have to explain these are really important industry publications. These are early pre-publication reviews. The people who are looking at this are bookstore buyers and managers and people who buy, who are acquiring books for their library collections, and editors and magazine editors likely, or journal newspaper editors likely to assign a review. So all of these things help. And what you want to see is a certain amount of momentum from that point on. But books have really long lives, and we're equally grateful for all of the reviews that come out 3 years after a book is published, and there are quite a lot of those too.
And Publishers Weekly, Kirkus, Booklist, Hornbook, whoever's reviewing these books, don't review books out of pure kindness. Publishers solicit those reviews, right?
Yes.
Okay.
But they select, and we have no control over what draws somebody's eye. And I'm sure the editors assigning those reviews are similar to me and how they do their job. They want to have a representative field or a selection of reviews that they're offering to their readers, but they also have stuff that they just kind of love. We all do, and want to spotlight. So, and of course it makes sense. The Venn diagram between people who are interested in books and people who are interested in illustration should have a good amount of significant overlap, I would think. So sure. I hope that they were, genuinely both personally and professionally interested, and the reviewers were great and capaciously illustrated, or capaciously. That's a very
impressively capacious.
Impressively capacious is a very Dowdian turn of phrase, I would think. So it's kind of appropriate.
That's hilarious.
Really roomy. Let's do that one.
He likes adverbs, adjectives, pairing. Yeah, absolutely. It was a very brilliant phrase.
And also too plentiful use of italics, parenthetic expressions,
Yes.
Michelle fumigated my prose, I think.
You do. You love ital.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I worked in publishing for a lot of years, and of course, we were always excited when we got a starred review. I mean, I have several children's books I illustrated many years ago that got starred reviews from Publishers Weekly, and I was an absolutely insufferable coworker for like 3 weeks because that's all I would talk about. So, of course, these are great. However, I don't feel like this anymore. I was much more fiery in my youth, but I just kind of was like, this is silly. This is just us bookmakers and intellectual types getting all excited about a starred review from Kirkus. And I would always say, like, does this pass what I used to call, does my sister give a shit test? My sister, I have 2 sisters, and both of them could not be further away from the literature world. I mean, they still kind of don't know what I do. And even though I've explained it to them for many years.
Same.
Yeah. I mean, we could talk about that later if you want. But anyway, do either of my sisters go into the bookstore and go, excuse me, I'm sorry, could you point the way to the Kirkus starred review
books? Where's the shelf for the books that received starred reviews in Kirkus, please? Thank you.
Yeah, no.
But all of the readers look for different things. And I think what we want is resonance. We want some larger kind of echo. And some people love staff recommendations in bookstores. I love staff recommendations in bookstores. Some people love hearing about something on a wonderful podcast, or
I don't know, Betty.
Or in a book review. I think we all get our recommendations from different places, and so it's hard work, really, trying to get one particular project into all of the relevant hands and hoping that it's going to click.
I mean, it's different for children's books when it comes to something like the Caldecott or the Ezra Jack Keats Award or something along those lines, the Geisel Award. If there's a big old shiny sticker on the front cover,
Yeah.
it's more likely to get attention. But Michelle, do you find that book buyers, doesn't matter who, independent book buyers or larger store buyers, do you find that, I don't know if they're using Edelweiss or some other online catalog, do you find that they gravitate more toward books that have good reviews, or is that even a factor?
I am not the right person to answer that question. I'm going to be honest. And
Should have invited somebody else. All right.
Yeah. Well, if I'm trying to think of what unfortunately, there's no blanket yes or no response to that question. So I think some buyers know what they like, and they know what their customers like, and people will buy for certain readers. Sometimes, and you just don't even know how much real estate somebody has in their store for a large, oversized book or a book that is over $50. Sometimes you're working with a small space there, and that's not their primary reader. So I do think our sales reps use all of the tools that are available to them with a lot of skill. It's very personalized outreach. And when we get a great review, or Publishers Weekly, Starred Kirkus Review, let alone post-publication, when we get a great review, they are making sure that buyers know about it. They know their buyers really well. They're sending things out one by one. It's that level of kind of granular outreach.
Yeah. I mean, it helps. It helps.
100%.
But we don't know how much it helps.
We do not. We do not.
Maybe I shouldn't ask you this with DB in the room. When I was working in publishing and we get a really great review, almost immediately the conversation turned toward, when we reprint this cover, we're going to put a clip of this review with a star on the front cover. The understanding there was that if this book is on the shelf and it has a star on it and a quote on it, it's more likely to get picked up and therefore bought. So is that something that you're planning to do with this book? You can close your ears.
Oh, it's fine. There are all kinds of conventions for how these things are handled, and it's different for heavily illustrated books that are very expensive, where the print run might be larger. It probably has to be larger in order to make it work. We're not going to be, we hope to reprint, but that's not going to be happening usually within the first 12 to 24 months.
It will after this episode, I promise you.
It definitely will. Okay, well, then I should probably make a decision about this right now.
Call the printer.
Yep. Let me send an email.
All right.
We generally kind of stay away from the industry reviews from Publishers Weekly and Kirkus and Book List unless there's something outstanding. We really want extracts from more descriptive kind of general interest reviews. But we look at everything. Who knows what reviews are to come for this book once it publishes in April. And hopefully we'll get something. This is also the kind of book where people who are interested in this whose opinion would really make a difference? It's hard to say. So, but certainly, we do have options, and it's great to have a wonderful comment on the back cover or the front cover. We love to have them, and we kind of judiciously select them and try to make the best possible case.
If there's a second printing of this book, I'll be thrilled beyond belief. So, my expectations are modest. Let's see how it's received.
Well, mine are not. So
yeah, I was going to do.
Come on.
Okay.
What? Yeah, you and I are different people, DB. Because if I had something like this going on, I would be shouting to the rooftops like 100. Of course, this is going to sell 100,000 copies. Like, no doubt, it's going to sell. I typically do that. I raise the bar so high, and then it has no chance of reaching it, and then I get disappointed. So I'm like Clark Griswold in that way. I had another question. Of course, it fell out of my head.
I have one, if you would allow me. Okay.
Of course.
So I generally work with art historians and architectural historians, people who are trained. Their training is in archival research and writing and argumentation. And I can probably count on one hand the number of authors I've worked with who also consider themselves practitioners of the crafts that they study or the art forms that they study. So people who work on Michelangelo tend to not have tried carving marble. I have one remarkable author who's
I did.
Did
twice.
you?
Yeah.
Oh, listen, I'd love to hear about that. I have one author who is a pre-Columbianist. He writes on Inca art and culture, and specifically textiles. And he is a weaver himself. He grows cotton, he dyes cotton, he weaves, and this significantly informs the scholarship that he does, this level of material knowledge and practice. Just knowing how a weaver sits at their loom, knowing the orientation of the thread. It's really phenomenal. And it extends into his knowledge of dyes and fading and all this stuff. Anyway, Douglas is also an artist, also a printmaker, also an illustrator, as well as a historian. And I wonder to what extent that knowledge and that practical knowledge influenced his thinking and his writing as he was working his way through this mammoth project.
He's here. We can ask him.
I know, Douglas.
I mean, massively is the answer. There's a fair amount of stuff about print technologies, but not in the abstract, but in the purely physical act of working on a plate. You know, up until lithography, if you wanted to print from the general term that is sometimes used, from a matrix, from a block or a metal plate, which has been prepared, is being prepared so that you can get a printed impression from it. You are assaulting the topography of the plate. You are scratching it, gouging it.
Are you referring to intaglio?
Well,
technique?
intaglio, woodcut, you have to gouge out the wood so that the raised areas will print and the stuff you took away will not, which is very taxing. For example, if you're engraving copper and you want to make a curve, you don't turn the tool, you turn the plate. Because if you turn the tool, it shoots out of control. Like a woodcut, the ink is on the top surface, and what you take away doesn't print, which is the opposite of intaglio. Right. And even lithography involves chemical etching. And so what it means to make a thing from which you will print and how printing works is of just fundamental importance. And I think I write about those processes, and I think I write about what printed matter looks like in a way that reflects that I've done those things.
I think so too.
That makes sense. I mean, I'm not going to read a book about mental health from someone who hasn't had experiences with depression. That wouldn't
There are no
serve me.
linkages between mental health, depression, and printmaking. Let's not connect those things.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. As DB was explaining it,
those are entirely separate things. I don't know what made you think of that.
I was just thinking, like, back in the day, if Instagram had existed, it would have absolutely floored these people because they would not have been able to keep up with all of it. And I had a question here about social media and AI that I deleted because I'd rather not touch on those things today.
Yeah, another time.
I think it was tricky to know how this book was going to conclude. And I think Douglas really...
Are you taking us there, Michelle?
No, I'm not ready to do that yet. I have one more thing to say, but then I think Douglas does in fact conclude it. The conclusion of the book is really fitting and very, very well done, and kind of looking ahead to what the challenges are. But
does it say, don't forget to smash that bell, follow and subscribe?
No, we'll do that to you. But love Douglas.
DB
Dowd. One of the things that has really, in my acquiring, I don't have a geography that I'm looking for or a particular time period that I focus on, and some editors and publishers do. But what's very important to me is approach. And I love books that position visual culture and our designed, built, created world in the wider world. So we see very clearly how made visual things are embedded in our world. We understand why they're important, and we understand the interaction between fine art, popular culture, visual culture, and every other, all the connections that my books can have to other disciplines, to literature, to natural history, to religion. That's one of the guiding principles for my acquisition strategy, and I think for the publisher that I work with. And so there are lots of terms: multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary, cross-disciplinary. Illustration is the thing that does that more than anything. And I mean, architecture probably too is so deeply embedded in economics and sociology. But Douglas's particular approach to telling this history, you cannot, in the way that he writes and the way that he argues, you cannot extract illustration. It's never something that's just happening off on its own in this beautiful little kind of bakery off to the side. It is always a result of world trends and influences and needs and consumer demands and politics. That to me is really, really exciting for when any book does it. But to really put illustration squarely in that position, I think is a thrill. And I think one of the real successes of this project.
Well said.
Thank you.
I'm so glad you think so.
I do.
You guys are working on book 2. Michelle, are you around Princeton or are you working remotely?
I live outside of Princeton, about 40 minutes away on the Delaware River, but I am in Princeton 2 days a week, sometimes more.
We're not that far apart, you and I.
I don't know where you live.
And let's keep it that way.
Okay. That's fair.
I live an hour west of Philly.
Oh, yeah.
If you're familiar with Longwood Gardens.
I just went to Longwood Gardens 2 weeks ago for the first time. I live in Lambertville.
Hop, skip, and a jump.
Yeah.
From right there.
It was beautiful.
Oh, of course.
Even in winter.
So DB, last time you and I spoke, I gave you the last word in our chat. So you're not going to get it here.
Okay.
Michelle is.
Oh, no.
That's probably just as well.
So DB, if readers take away just one lesson or observation after reading pictures, what do you hope it is?
Wow. There's a historian, Michael Kamen, who writes about the American historical memory. And there's a passage in a book he wrote about the way in which photography affected the way people remembered things. He then went on to say, but golly, something else was happening at the same time in the late 19th century. This is a paraphrase. Quote, new technologies of printing also had a big impact. And the way that editors used popular images, it's something like that. What the guts of the quote are these images that seemingly, I guess, you would just find on the ground, like an outcropping of stone, had an impact, right? The idea that no, they didn't occur organically. People planned them, executed them, printed them, distributed them, and they shaped how events were seen and remembered, or how other people were seen and remembered, for good, but often for ill. What I would hope, I hope this isn't a long-winded answer to your question, but what I would hope is that the reader would recognize the degree to which that pictures in league with words have been used cunningly in many different contexts to have a big impact about how we see, how we process experience. illustrations tend to be mere images as opposed to celebrated artworks. They're perceived passively, like you just absorb them without reflecting on them. And also the way that words inflect those images and vice versa. That illustration is hugely influential about the world that we're walking around in. And people have not recognized that to the degree that one would hope they would.
Yeah.
And
it's an understatement.
When you think about what an image is doing, I hope that people will come away realizing like, oh, this is actually pretty complicated. So Kammen's recognition that it wasn't just all about photography leaves out the fact that there are whole groups of people who are fashioning those images, thinking them up, fashioning them, and deploying them to affect ideas. And that modern life, it's everywhere. So I don't know. I think that's what I think.
Okay, I'll take it. Michelle, we have writers and illustrators listening. What piece of advice or insight would you, as a publisher, like to share directly with them?
I think that because publishing can appear to be so iterative and because of these, the risks that we talked about, but, suddenly there's a really successful book on a child wizard. And then for the next decades, there's series after series after series of wizard cats and other children doing magical things. And, because we want things that we publishers then look at that and say, oh, that's something that's working. I would say, please continue doing the weird, creative, brilliant, original work that you are doing. And don't try to present an editor or a publisher with another version of something that was successful, even if you're worried that that's what they're looking for. There's no project we're all looking for something that clicks with us, and having a beautiful vision that is uniquely your own and a work that reflects that. That's the thing that I want to see. That can only come from a kind of artistic, generative originality. And don't be afraid to do that and to present that, even if it seems like perhaps that's not what's wanted.
Find reading pictures at your favorite bookstore or at press.princeton.edu/books. If you find value in this podcast, consider becoming a patron. In return, you can access bonus episodes, receive invitations to our Art Directors After Hours series, and get a 10% off discount code for all ID offerings. Become a patron by visiting patreon.com/illustrationdept. Thank you so much for listening. Until next time.